I honestly feel like I did at the end of Hannibal and Game of Thrones. I'm thinking to myself, I have to wait another 10 months for the Knick, which was honestly one of the most unique shows of the summer. If not unique, then certainly the most enjoyable. I mean, I don't mean to put too much of a hyperbole on it, but yeah, the Knick, I really enjoyed the Knick season 1. And of course, given how this show has hooked me up to this point, I am of course excited about where they're going to take it for season 2, especially given all that has happened to change the status quo. Now, one thing that really impressed me about this episode is that it was kind of like episode 7, which was the riot episode, in the sense that there was just so much advancement on so many fronts. I mean, there wasn't really a whole lot of filler here. And the recurring theme behind it all, I thought, was, doing something very drastic and in more cases, than not, very harmful, but doing it with the best intentions. Because, you had Thackeray working desperately to outdo Dr. Zinberg in the field of, or in the area of blood transfusions. You had Dr. What's his name, the guy in charge of Mrs. Gallinger's rehabilitation, pulling teeth, which I gotta look that up, see if that was actually a practice to cure insanity or sickness of the mind. I have to look that up. I'm actually kind of curious now. But there was that. There was also Cornelia getting rid of the baby, and going ahead with her marriage to Philip, which again, I'll get back to this, but again, is keeping with the theme of doing something very drastic with the best intentions, or at least with the most logical justification. I mean, and that wasn't the only thing. There was also let's see. Oh, and finally, we had where Thackeray ended up at the end of the episode, which I don't really know how much I can really spoil at this point, considering the episode. It's been like almost 24 hours since the episode aired, but Thackeray ending up in that shelter to cure his cocaine addiction. I mean, that was certainly something drastic, and it put Thackeray in a position that we haven't seen him before on this show, which was that of the patient. I mean, he's had this cocaine dependency up until this point, and I love that final twist because I actually think that is pretty historically accurate. Um, with the cocaine or with the heroin. But yeah, for the most part, I was pretty much hooked in all of these plot lines, and while not all of them directly connected with each other, like I said, they still tied in with that same general theme, and in some loose ways, they all kind of affected each other because Gallinger obviously works at the Knick, and um, obviously his the happenings at his home are going to affect the Knick in some way, considering he is such a valued member of the staff, or was. Thackeray obviously is the chief of surgery, so anything that happens to him is going to happen to the is going to affect the Knick at large. I mean, Cornelia, who has run the Knick or has partially run the Knick up to this point, she's presumably off to San Francisco, so there's that, and also Dr. Edwards, who no longer has his A game. I mean, his one of his primary fixations throughout this entire show is gone from his life, and in addition, he lost what could have potentially been his son slash daughter. So that's bound to hit him pretty hard. So yeah, all of these plot lines, although not directly correct connected, were were all tying into the overall story of the Knick and those involved at the Knick. So it's loose, but I'm going with it. And like I said, they were kind of tied together with that general theme. And the plot lines themselves, I actually thought were really well told. I mean, not one plot line I thought was abandoned or shortchanged here. I mean, there was always this clear sense of focus on each one, and the fact that they were able to do that without necessarily having the episode feel like a mess, again, is a credit to the writing and the direction. And again, the acting is on some fronts was some of the strongest, and even in the cases where that was not necessarily the case. I know I'm kind of getting redundant here, but even for the actors who were just kind of living up to their usual standards, those are still high standards. I mean, Clive Owen is still fantastic. He still carries the show beautifully, but also we have all these other actors who, as far as I'm concerned, have the chops to be have every bit the chops that a lot of veteran actors do. Because Juliet Rylance is still very good as Cornelia. Michael Angarano, if I'm butchering his last name, I'm sorry, but the guy from Forbidden Kingdom, he's still very good. In fact, this is probably his best episode to date as Birdie. And Eric Johnson, I thought was still pretty solid as Gallinger, which Gallinger, we saw him at his absolute lowest point in this episode. So if the show wanted to make me feel bad for Gallinger, then mission accomplished, I guess. Still really no progression between him and Edwards, but again, I guess they're saving that for next season. And speaking of that, I love how in this episode they Thackeray and Edwards have this really casual relationship. They've broken the ice. They've really gotten to know one another at this point. I don't really know how long season 1 spans in terms of time, but it's nice to see that there has been some real progression in that relationship, which is something that Clive Owen promised when he was interviewed at the beginning of the show. Now, let's see. What I really liked about Cornelia's arc is that on the surface, everything seemed to be going great. Everything seemed to be looking up. I mean, she was receiving all of these wedding gifts. The wedding itself was just very elaborate. It was very beautiful, despite how a lot of the colors were kind of understated and muted. And on the surface, just judging by what you're seeing on screen, it should be good. But the way it's filmed and the way it's acted and the way it's directed, it's very bleak and very empty, which again perfectly sums up how the character is feeling. And I always think it's very interesting how the way that a scene is shot and how it's directed, and even to a certain extent how it's acted, really reflects the inner turmoil of the character without necessarily having the character have to say anything about it. And yeah, really the only two characters who I thought didn't really get enough to do this time around was let's see, Cleary. I thought Cleary was kind of shortchanged, and Sister Harriet. I think there could have been a little bit more in the way of interaction between Sister Harriet and Cornelia as to the abortion, which again, I love how this episode treats abortion because you think abortion is a sensitive subject today. I mean, think about it back then when it wasn't really just I don't want to get too deep into this at the risk of becoming controversial, but abortion, it was basically widely accepted, especially among nuns, that abortion was, killing a baby. And the fact that Sister Harriet has been doing this, and the fact that Edwards has to basically sit by and let this happen to the woman he loves at her own request, I thought was beautifully acted and well handled all around. I mean, on the part of Andre Holland and Juliet Rylance. So yeah, I really liked how this episode turned out. Like I said, the status quo was drastically changed. And the thing with Birdie eventually, for lack of a better term, coming over to the dark side, finally abandoning Thackeray, I was kind of dreading that. The way that they were foreshadowing that, I was kind of dreading it. Because not only do I like the relationship between Birdie and Thackeray, but in addition, I thought it would just be another one of those Anakin Skywalker type, I believed in you, and I thought it would be really cliched and just lousy. I thought it would be just one of those cliched, contrived scenes, but it really wasn't. Again, it was very understated, which again is in keeping with the nature of this show. I mean, Birdie raises his voice once, and then yeah, they take him to Birdie's dad to get treatment for the addiction. So yeah, I thought for one, I thought that was very well acted by all those involved. Eve Hewson, Clive Owen, and Michael Angarano. Again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name. I'm sorry. He's a good actor. That's all that matters. Uh, so yeah, well directed episode. It was well paced. I thought all the plot lines balanced out pretty well. I love how bleak everything was. I mean, it was just one punch to the gut after another for this episode. I mean, nothing was really happy, which doesn't really make for that kind of and for quote unquote entertainment in the sense that I'm having a good time watching this. It in another sense, it really kind of drew me in all that much more to this show, especially again considering the Knick is closing and moving uptown. Yeah, I'm interested to see where it's going to go from here. And 10 months, uh, 10 months. Well, well, at least we'll have Hannibal season 3, Vikings season 2, and Game of Thrones season 5 to fill in the gap, in addition to all the year-round shows. So yeah, the Knick, honestly, one of summer's best new shows, and oddly enough, not one that's not getting nearly enough views. I'm beginning to think that's a pattern with certain shows that I watch.